Grandma's voice was soft, but it hit like ice water. "Oh, sweetheart, the party was last week." I was standing in my apartment, clutching the gold-embossed invitation that had just arrived, my name printed neatly, the words support staff staring back at me like a bruise. And the worst part? Mom had mailed it herself, with the wrong date. But that wasn't the sharpest cut. The real pain came when she called, her voice syrup-sweet, saying, "Don't make a fuss, Mia. Lauren's the face of the bakery. You just help." The bakery I'd worked nights to save, the place Grandma and I built, loaf by loaf. She didn't just keep me from the 50th anniversary. She made sure the whole town thought I'd skipped it. And yet, standing there with snow falling outside my window, I knew one thing. They thought they'd erased me. They had no idea what I was about to find. The radiator hissed, and a cold draft slipped through the glass. If you've ever been cut out by your own family, if you've ever felt that burn in your chest, leave me a comment that says, "I understand." Funny how one lie can crack open a memory you thought you'd buried 3 years earlier. The smell of cinnamon always takes me back to that kitchen. Not the shiny, spotless one you see in magazines. Ours was small, cluttered, and warm in a way that got under your skin. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, catching the flour in the air so it looked like dust motes drifting through gold. The counters were worn smooth from decades of kneading, and the old oven gave off a low hum as if it were alive and listening. I was maybe 8 the first time Grandma let me shape the dough on my own. She stood beside me, her hands dusted white to the elbows, and whispered, "Don't rush it, Mia. Bread has its own clock." The dough pushed back under my fingers, soft but certain, and I remember thinking, if I did this right, maybe Mom would notice me. She never did. Mom would breeze in from the front of the bakery, heels clicking against the tile, a cloud of perfume trailing behind her like she was walking a runway instead of coming home. She'd barely glance at my dough. But if Lauren so much as wandered in, wearing that bored half-smile, Mom's whole face would light up. Lauren never touched the oven. She didn't have to. I told myself it was fine. Not everyone had to love the smell of rising bread. But when the bakery was on the edge of foreclosure last winter, I stayed up night after night, working the coffee shop until close, rolling tips into crumpled bills to pay the back taxes. I didn't tell anyone, not even Grandma. I thought if I saved the bakery, maybe, just maybe, Mom would see me. I can still picture that night. My fingers aching as I sealed the envelope for the county office, the paper inside warm from my hands. Walking home through the quiet streets, the cold biting at my ears, I imagined Mom's voice softening when she found out. I imagined her saying thank you, but she never asked where the money came from. She just kept smiling at Lauren. Sometimes, standing in that kitchen, I'd glance at the cracks running along the wall near the pantry. The building was old, everyone knew it. But those cracks felt personal, like the place itself understood what it was to be there and not be seen. Grandma noticed, though, in her own quiet way. She'd slide me the first warm roll from the oven, still steaming, and give me that look, the one that said she saw all of it, even the things I never said out loud. I wonder now if she saw more than I realized. Every loaf I shaped carried a piece of me, my hope, my frustration, my longing. But Mom's eyes always found Lauren first. And the question I never stopped asking, not even as I stood there with flour under my nails and cinnamon in my hair, was the one that still keeps me awake some nights. Why am I always the invisible one? It came on a Tuesday. The envelope was thick, its edges pressed sharp enough to nick a fingertip. My name was printed in elegant curling script, like it belonged to someone important. The gold embossing along the flap caught the weak winter light coming through my apartment window, and for a second, I let myself think maybe, just maybe, this was something good. I slid a finger under the flap and peeled it open. A waft of expensive paper and ink hit me, the kind you only use when you want to make a statement. Inside was a creamy card, gold lettering dancing under the light. The 50th anniversary of Clara's bakery. My chest tightened. Our bakery. I scanned the details, my eyes catching on the line near the bottom. Honoring Lauren Carter, heir apparent. Underneath, in smaller print, Mia Carter, support staff. The words seemed to pulse on the page, each one louder than the last. Support staff. It felt like someone had pressed a thumb right into my sternum. The phone rang, startling me. Mom's number lit up the screen. I hesitated, the card still in my hand. my fingers leaving faint creases on its edge. I pressed accept. Her voice was sweet, almost sticky. "Don't make a fuss, Mia. It's just a formality." I swallowed hard. A formality? My voice sounded thin, like it was traveling from the bottom of a well. "You know how these things are," she went on. "Lauren's the face of the bakery. You help keep things running." A quiet heat started in my chest, spreading to my neck. I wanted to tell her about the nights I'd stayed up paying bills she never asked about, the hours I'd spent keeping that place alive. But her tone made it clear. This wasn't a conversation. It was a dismissal. She hung up before I could say another word. I stood there for a moment, staring at the embossed letters until they blurred. My reflection in the window looked smaller somehow. I called Grandma. She picked up after 2 rings, her voice warm like fresh bread. "Mia, honey." "Grandma, I got the invitation for the bakery anniversary." There was a pause. Not the kind you take when you're thinking, but the kind that slips in when you realize you've stepped into dangerous territory. "Oh, sweetheart," she said gently. "The party was last week." For a moment, the world tilted. "Last week?" My fingers loosened. The invitation slid from my hand and drifted to the floor, landing face down like it was ashamed of itself. "I thought you knew," Grandma murmured. "Your mother, she sent you a different date." I couldn't answer. The radiator hissed softly in the corner, filling the silence between us. Grandma sighed, the sound heavy enough to bend the air. "She didn't want you there, Mia. I'm sorry." My throat felt tight, but I managed to whisper, "Why?" "I wish I knew," she said, but her voice wavered like she suspected more than she was willing to say. After we hung up, I stayed by the window. Outside, the street was still, the kind of stillness that makes you feel like the only person left in the world. Snow had begun to fall again, dusting the parked cars, the lamplight turning each flake into a tiny burst of gold before it melted. I picked up the invitation from the floor. The gold edges didn't look so bright anymore. I traced the raised lettering with my thumb, feeling each groove like a fresh bruise. The card should have been something to keep, to tuck into a drawer and find years later with a smile. Instead, it felt like a paperweight on my chest. Memories flickered uninvited. Me at 12, arranging cupcakes for a customer while Mom stood beside Lauren, laughing about something I wasn't part of. Me at 16, sweeping the bakery floor while Lauren was upstairs trying on dresses for a party. Me last year, signing the check that saved the bakery without anyone knowing. And now, not even a seat at the table. Not even the truth about when the party was. The snow outside kept falling, the world moving on like nothing had happened. But inside my apartment, the air was thick. My hands curled into fists at my sides, not from cold, but from the ache of being erased. The phone sat on the table, black screen reflecting my face in warped miniature. I wanted to call her back, to demand an explanation, to make her say out loud why she thought I didn't belong. But some part of me knew she'd just find another way to make it my fault. Instead, I set the invitation on the sill, where the weak light made the gold glint like a cruel joke. The radiator hissed again. Somewhere down the hall, a door slammed, the sound snapping me back into myself. My pulse was loud in my ears, a steady drumbeat under the quiet. I thought about Grandma's voice, soft, but edged with something like regret. I thought about Mom's syrupy tone, the way she said, "Don't make a fuss," as if my hurt was nothing more than a smudge to wipe away. The smell of cinnamon from this morning's toast still lingered faintly in the air. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I was back in the bakery, shaping dough under Grandma's watchful gaze, believing that if I just kept going, kept giving, it would be enough. But it wasn't. And standing there, looking out at the falling snow, I realized this was more than a scheduling mistake or an oversight. This was deliberate. A choice to make me invisible, not just to the customers or the town, but to my own family. My breath fogged the cold glass. Somewhere in that fog, the reflection of the gold letters on the card shimmered faintly, like they were taunting me. How could they erase me like that? The next morning, I couldn't sit still. The fake invitation lay crumpled on my kitchen table, its gold edges dulled by the night's weight. Every time I looked at it, I felt that same tight coil in my chest, the one that had kept me awake until the sky outside turned pale. I told myself I wasn't going there to cause a scene, but my boots still carried me down the snow-packed sidewalks toward the bakery, each step crunching like it was biting back something sharp. The bell above the door chimed as I pushed it open. The familiar scent of brown sugar and butter wrapped around me, but it didn't comfort me the way it used to. The air was warmer than I expected, almost stifling, and the hum of the ovens in the back sounded like a low growl. Mom was behind the counter, her hair swept up neatly, the bakery's logo stitched across the apron she almost never wore when I was younger. She glanced up from the register, her mouth curving into something that could barely pass for a smile. "You always overreact, Mia," she said before I even spoke. The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. My hands curled at my sides. "Overreact? You sent me an invitation to a party that already happened. You made me look like I didn't care about the bakery." Her eyes slid past me toward the display case, as though the arrangement of croissants mattered more than the person standing in front of her. "You're being dramatic. It was just a celebration, nothing more." "Nothing more?" My voice caught and I forced it steady. 50 years. Grandma's legacy. And you wrote me down as support staff. She shrugged like it was a detail lost in the paperwork. That shrug, so casual, so dismissive, made my jaw tighten until it ached. The door behind me swung open, letting in a slice of cold air and the faint squeak of boots on tile. Lauren stepped inside, her hair gleaming under the overhead lights, a new ring catching the light with every move of her hand. She didn't even glance at me. "Mom, I just stopped by to show you the ring. Isn't it gorgeous?" She held out her hand, fingers splayed like she was unveiling a prize. Mom's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years, the kind of beaming smile I used to imagine she'd give me if I ever did something worth noticing. "Oh, Lauren, it's beautiful," she said, leaning forward to take her hand. I stood there, invisible in my own family's bakery, the smell of brown sugar thick in the air but tasting bitter in the back of my throat. Something in me snapped. I stepped forward, resting my hands on the worn wooden counter. The edge dug into my palms, grounding me in its roughness. "Why don't you ever see me?" The question slipped out, quiet but sharp, like the moment before a glass shatters. Neither of them answered. Mom let go of Lauren's hand and turned back to the register, her movements measured, deliberate. Lauren adjusted her coat, eyes flicking toward the door. The silence between us was heavier than any words they could have thrown. I thought about the nights I'd worked to save this place, the bills I'd paid without asking for credit, the hope I'd carried like a loaf in the oven, expecting it to rise into something worth having. And yet, here I was, still standing behind the glass of my own life, watching them live in the warmth I'd helped build. The chalkboard menu above the counter still listed my cinnamon rolls as a seasonal special. The handwriting was mine. I'd done it last week, but seeing it now felt like someone else's work. My throat tightened. I took a step back, letting the counter release my palms. The warmth in here was suffocating, like the heat was trying to push me out. Mom finally looked up. "If you're done, I have customers to serve." The bell above the door jingled again as an older couple came in, shaking snow from their coats. The moment was gone. I knew it. She knew it. I turned toward the door, my boots squeaking against the floor. The cold outside hit my face like a slap, but it was cleaner than the air I'd just left behind. Halfway down the block, I glanced back. Through the bakery's front window, I saw Mom laughing at something Lauren said, her hand reaching out to squeeze her arm. My stomach twisted. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let them keep pretending I didn't matter. Still, the question lingered in my chest, heavy and unanswered. Why had she erased me from that night? The air outside the bakery bit at my cheeks, but it wasn't enough to cool the heat still burning in my chest. I walked fast, not toward home, but down the narrow alley that ran behind the shop. The snow here was untouched, except for a thin trail of paw prints zigzagging toward the back fence. The shed stood in the shadow of the building, small, weather-beaten, leaning just slightly to one side like it had been fighting the wind for too many winters. The wooden padlock on the door was old, the kind you could probably pry open with the right amount of stubbornness. I'd been in here a few times when I was younger, fetching crates or storing bags of flour, but I hadn't stepped inside for years. Mom always kept it locked now, claiming it was unsafe. The metal latch was icy under my fingers. I jiggled it, the sound sharp in the quiet alley. A cold draft slipped through the seam in the door, carrying with it the faint smell of sawdust and something else. Old yeast, maybe. The lock wasn't as stubborn as I expected. A sharp tug and it popped open. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the kind that clings to your throat. Shafts of pale light came through a cracked window, catching on stacks of cardboard boxes, old baking trays, and burlap sacks slumped against the wall. My boots crunched against scattered sugar crystals on the floor, the sound too loud in the stillness. I moved deeper in, scanning for anything out of place. That's when I saw it, tucked under an old metal shelf in the far corner. A wooden box, dark with age, its lid engraved in familiar handwriting. I crouched down, my knees creaking against the cold floor, and brushed a layer of dust from the top. The script was careful, deliberate, the way she always wrote notes for me as a kid. For Mia, when the time comes. My heart stumbled. The grain of the wood was smooth under my fingertips, except for the shallow grooves of the carving. The hinges gave a soft squeal as I lifted the lid, the sound oddly tender, like it had been waiting. Inside, resting against the faded red lining, was a photograph. It was me, maybe 9 years old, standing in front of the bakery with Grandma. She had her arm around my shoulders, her head bent toward mine in mid-laugh. In my hands, I held a loaf of bread still wrapped in paper. The edges of the photo were curled, the colors softened with time. I traced Grandma's face with my thumb, the ache in my chest deepening. Beneath the photo, folded in half, was a small piece of paper. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. The handwriting was hers again, a little shakier than in the carving, but still unmistakable. Mia, if you're reading this, it means the time has come. The bakery has a true will. You need to find it. I read the words twice, my pulse quickening with each pass. The true will? The paper didn't explain where it was or why it existed, but the implication was clear enough to make my stomach twist. There was something about the bakery, about me, that I didn't know. I sat back on my heels, the chill from the floor seeping through my jeans. My breath came out in short clouds. I thought about Mom's face when she dismissed me yesterday, the way she'd looked right past me to beam at Lauren, the way Grandma's voice had dipped when she said, "She didn't want you there," and now this. Proof that Grandma had set something aside for me, something Mom had never mentioned. The box felt heavier than it should as I lifted it into my arms. The wood was cold against my coat, but the weight of it was almost comforting, like I was holding on to a piece of her. The wind outside had picked up, rattling the shed's loose window pane. I pulled the door closed behind me and set the lock back in place, though the metal felt flimsy in my hands. As I stepped into the alley, the box pressed tight against my ribs, the snow crunching under my boots. I knew I couldn't take this straight home, not yet. I needed to think. The note burned in my pocket. Not just the words, but the possibilities. What had Grandma been trying to protect? From who? When I reached the main street, I glanced back at the bakery. The front window glowed warm against the gray afternoon, silhouettes moving inside. Somewhere in there, Mom was probably laughing with a customer, maybe bragging about Lauren's engagement ring. She had no idea what I'd just found. I tightened my grip on the box. Whatever the true will was, it was mine to uncover now. But one thought kept looping in my head, louder than the wind, louder than the memory of Mom's cold stare. What was Grandma hiding? The box sat on my kitchen table like it was breathing. Every time I passed it, I could feel the weight of what I didn't yet know pressing against me. But instead of opening it again, I found myself staring at the steam curling up from my coffee, trying to quiet the noise in my head. It didn't work. Because the note inside, Grandma's handwriting, those careful, shaky lines, had stirred something I'd spent years pushing down. All at once, the past was sitting in the room with me. And it wasn't polite. It didn't wait to be invited in. I could still smell the bitter sting of burnt espresso from the coffee shop where I worked nights, the one with flickering lights and a heater that rattled louder than the conversations. I'd clock out at midnight, my hair smelling like roasted beans and fryer oil, and walk home through air so cold it felt like my lungs might freeze. Every paycheck went straight to the bakery. No one asked me to. I just did it. It felt like proof. Proof that I was invested, that I belonged. Mom knew about the bills. She knew how close the bakery had been to shutting its doors. But whenever I asked if she'd put my name on the will, she'd give the same answer. "Lauren needs it more, Mia." At first, I told myself it was just the way she said it, quick, like she was distracted. Maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded. Maybe she thought Lauren was struggling in ways I couldn't see. But then I'd think of Lauren's weekends in the city, the way she'd post pictures from rooftop bars, her nails perfectly manicured, her wine glass catching the light like it was her own personal spotlight. And I'd still be wiping down counters at 2 a.m., praying the tips were enough to cover the next tax bill. I can still remember the night I handed over the largest payment I'd ever scraped together. Mom didn't even open the envelope in front of me. She just tucked it under a stack of mail, thanked me in the same tone she'd use if I'd brought her a cup of tea, and asked if I'd mind mopping the back floor. I told myself it didn't matter, that maybe the real thanks would come later, when she finally saw I was the one holding things together. I believed that for longer than I should have. Now, with Grandma's note in my pocket and the box still closed in front of me, those years felt like over-kneaded dough, stiff, impossible to shape, ruined by too much effort. Outside my window, snow slid off the eaves and landed with a dull thud on the sidewalk. The sound made me jump. My hands tightened around my mug, the heat biting into my palms. What if the true will wasn't just about the bakery? What if it was about all those years I thought I understood my place in the family? I pushed back from the table, the chair legs scraping across the floor. The box was still there, quiet and solid. But the thing it had stirred in me was anything but. I thought of Mom's face yesterday. Not angry, not even annoyed, just unaffected, like I wasn't even worth the effort of a good lie. And I thought of Lauren, slipping in like sunlight through a crack, flashing that ring, drawing Mom's attention without even trying. I'd spent years believing I was part of the same picture. But maybe I'd been in the background all along, blurred out so no one noticed. The radiator hissed, and I could hear the faint tick of the clock over the sink. The sound felt like it was marking something. Not just time, but a line between the years I'd accepted things and whatever came next. I reached out and rested my fingers on the lid of the box. The wood was cool, smooth, solid. A reminder that Grandma had thought ahead, that she'd set something aside for me, even if Mom had tried to bury it. Whatever this true will was, it might be the first thing in years that could tip the balance back in my favor. But I couldn't shake the question curling around the edges of my thoughts, tight and persistent. If she'd hidden this from me, what else had Mom hidden? By the time I reached the bakery again, the winter air had numbed my cheeks, but the heat in my chest burned hotter than ever. The box from Grandma was still in my apartment, tucked away for now, a secret in waiting. But today wasn't about secrets. Today was about letting my mother see something she couldn't ignore. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. The place smelled like warm sugar and fresh bread, but the sweetness only made the bitterness in my throat sharper. Customers milled about near the display case, the low hum of conversation filling the space. Mom stood behind the counter in her pressed apron, her back straight, her smile polite but distant. I walked right up to her, the folder in my hand growing damp from my grip. She glanced at it, then at me, her expression already cooling. "If you're here to complain again, Mia..." I cut her off. "No, I'm here to show you something." I laid the papers on the counter between us. The top one bore my LLC's name in bold print, followed by the unmistakable legal language of an ownership transfer. The bakery's name was right there in black and white, purchased, signed, and sealed by me. Her face paled so fast it was almost satisfying. "What is this?" she asked, her voice low. "This," I said, keeping my voice steady, "is proof that when you almost lost the bakery to the bank 2 years ago, I bought it. Through my LLC, I've been the owner this whole time." She blinked as if the words didn't make sense. Then her jaw tightened. "You think you're so smart?" Lauren's voice broke in before I could answer. She had just walked in, shaking snow from her coat, her eyes catching on the papers spread across the counter. "What's going on?" Mom turned to her like she was a lifeline. "Your sister thinks she owns the bakery." I didn't flinch. "Not thinks, knows." Lauren stepped closer, her gaze darting between the documents and my face. You actually bought it? Someone had to. My hands were flat on the counter now, the wood cool against my palms. You were too busy posing for engagement photos, and Mom here was about to lose the place. Lauren's hand drifted to her stomach like she'd been punched. Mom said nothing, just kept staring at me like I'd walked in speaking another language. I saved it, I went on, and you've been running it like it's yours, parading Lauren around as the heir, when legally, I tapped the papers, it's mine. The customers nearby had gone quiet. A couple by the display case glanced over, pretending to study the muffins while clearly eavesdropping. But before I could press further, my eyes caught on a line halfway down the second page, a name listed under Silent Investor. I hadn't noticed it before. It wasn't anyone I recognized. The realization was like a pebble dropped into water, ripples spreading fast. I owned the bakery, but I wasn't the only one. Mom saw me pause, and a flicker of something crossed her face. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. "Who's this?" I asked, tapping the name. Her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just someone who believed in the bakery." I held her gaze. "Someone you didn't think I needed to know about?" "That's business," she said flatly, "and you don't understand all of it." I wanted to push, to demand the truth right there, in front of the customers, in front of Lauren, in front of anyone who might hear. But the name on the page felt like a door I wasn't ready to open yet, not without knowing what I'd find on the other side. Lauren shifted uneasily beside her. "Mom?" she began. But the older woman's hand shot out, a quick warning touch on her arm. The oven timer dinged in the back, and for a moment the smell of fresh bread swelled, filling the silence. I gathered the papers, sliding them back into the folder. "This changes things," I said, my voice quiet but certain. "For all of us." Mom didn't answer, neither did Lauren. The only sound was the low murmur of the customers, picking up again as if the scene at the counter had been nothing more than a passing distraction. I turned toward the door, the folder under my arm, my mind already working over that unfamiliar name. The cold air hit me as I stepped outside, but it felt cleaner than the air I'd just left behind. I owned the bakery. That was a fact now, no matter how much Mom tried to spin it. But someone else owned a piece of it too, and I needed to know why. The next time I saw Mom, it wasn't in the bakery. It was in the center of town, under harsh fluorescent lights, surrounded by folding chairs and the low murmur of neighbors. The annual town hall meeting had always been a dull formality. Budget updates, community events, someone griping about potholes. But tonight, the air was charged in a way I could feel in my skin. I stood near the back, the ownership papers in my hand, my fingers pressing into the folder until the edges bit into my palms. My breath fogged slightly in the draft from the double doors. Across the room, Mom stood at the podium, a picture of composure in her deep red blazer. Lauren was beside her, her new ring catching the light every time she lifted her hand. Mom's voice carried easily over the crowd. "And with great pride, I'd like to introduce the new official owner of Clara's Bakery, my eldest daughter, Lauren Carter." Applause rippled through the room, a few people even standing. Lauren smiled, stepping forward with that smooth grace she'd always had, the kind that made people lean toward her without realizing it. The sound in my ears narrowed to a thin, high ring. I took a breath, feeling the tension coil in my chest. Then I stepped forward. "Actually," I said loud enough to cut through the clapping, "that's not true." The room quieted almost instantly, heads turning toward me. Mom's smile faltered for half a second before returning, tight at the edges. "Mia," she said in a warning tone, "this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time." My boots echoed on the polished floor as I made my way down the aisle. Every step felt deliberate, heavier than it should have. I reached the front, placing the folder on the podium so the papers slid out for everyone to see. "These documents show that I bought the bakery 2 years ago through my LLC, which makes me the legal owner, not Lauren." Murmurs erupted in the crowd, quick and sharp. Someone in the back let out a low whistle. Mom's hand gripped the podium. "Mia, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I picked up the top sheet and held it up. "And if anyone needs more proof, here's the signature page from the sale. My name, the bank stamp, the date. All right there. Lauren's face had gone pale. She stepped closer to the microphone. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice shaky. I turned to her, because I'm tired of being erased, and since we're here, I might as well tell everyone. You wrote that fake anniversary invitation. You wanted to make sure I stayed away so you could have your perfect moment. A ripple moved through the crowd, voices rising in disbelief. Mom shot Lauren a look, but Lauren's eyes darted toward the floor. She started, her voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted one perfect day. The admission hung in the air like smoke. You lied to me, I said. And you lied to everyone here. The crowd wasn't murmuring anymore. They were talking openly now, the hum of gossip thick and alive. I could feel every stare, every judgment. Mom stepped forward, her voice sharp. Enough, Mia. You've made your point. But I wasn't done. No, I haven't. Because there's something else. This heir apparent announcement, it's meaningless. The bakery is mine, and I'll be making decisions from now on. Her eyes narrowed. We'll see about that. The tension between us was almost physical, like the air itself was leaning in to listen. I stepped back from the podium, letting the papers speak for me. The crowd had already turned, whispering, pointing, shifting in their seats. For the first time in years, I wasn't just background noise in the room. But as I walked toward the exit, the folder under my arm, I felt the weight of what had just happened settle over me. I'd won, at least in public, but the silent investor's name still sat like a stone in my mind, heavy and unanswered. The cold night air hit me as I stepped outside. My breath came in quick bursts, the adrenaline still humming in my veins. I knew Mom wouldn't let this go, and neither would I. The question clawed at me, sharper now than ever. Who really owned the rest of my bakery? The night after the town hall felt colder than it should have. Even with the radiator clicking in the corner of my apartment, a chill sat deep in my bones, the kind that had nothing to do with weather. I kept seeing their faces in my mind. Mom, frozen with that tight smile. Lauren, pale and wide-eyed after her confession. The crowd leaning in to listen like they were getting their first taste of scandal in years. But underneath all of that was the name I'd seen on the papers, the silent investor. Whoever they weren't just a footnote. People don't put money into a business without wanting something back. I didn't sleep much. By morning, I'd made a decision. The bakery was closed for the evening when I pushed open the side door later that day. The smell of flour still lingered in the air, mixing with the faint sweetness of powdered sugar from the morning's baking. The only light came from a single bulb above the counter, casting long shadows across the room. Jane was already there, standing near the register, with a manila box in her hands. She'd been the bakery's accountant for as long as I could remember. Neat, quiet, and precise, the kind of person who made you feel like your numbers were in good hands. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said softly. I stepped closer, my boots squeaking faintly against the tile. "After last night, I need answers. Real ones." She slid the box onto the counter. "Then you'd better look at these." Inside were stacks of files, rubber-banded and labeled in Jane's careful handwriting. Beneath them, a smaller envelope rested, its flap unsealed. I reached for it, but Jane's hand caught my wrist, gentle but firm. "Before you open that, you should know. Your mom didn't just hide the truth from you. She went out of her way to keep it buried." The envelope felt almost weightless in my hand, but my pulse pounded as if I were lifting something heavy. I pulled out a letter. The handwriting wasn't Grandma's. It was Mom's, and the date at the top was from over a year ago. The letter was addressed to a lawyer. "I want to ensure the will is interpreted in a way that favors Lauren. The original version isn't in the bakery's best interest, or mine." The words swam on the page, but I kept reading, my grip tightening with every line. If necessary, the old document should be destroyed. I can handle Mia. I set the letter down slowly, my hands trembling. "She tried to erase me, legally." Jane's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight. "Your mom feared your grandmother loved you more. That's why she did it. She wanted to make sure the bakery and everything it stood for passed to Lauren no matter what." The sound of the oven fan kicking on in the back startled me, though I knew no one else was here. My mind kept looping over Jane's words. Feared your grandmother loved you more. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to believe there was some other reason. But deep down, I'd always felt that fear in her. The way she looked at me when Grandma praised my baking, the quick deflections whenever someone mentioned my help keeping the bakery afloat. I shoved the letter back into the envelope, my jaw aching from how hard I was clenching it. And the investor? Jane hesitated. That's something I think you need to uncover yourself. But be careful. They're not just a name on paper. The shadows on the wall seemed to stretch a little longer, as if the room itself was leaning in to hear. I closed the box, the files inside shifting with a soft rustle. I could still smell the flour in the air, but it felt heavier now, almost suffocating. The bakery wasn't just mine. It was tangled in lies, secrets, and someone else's unseen hand. Jane stepped back, her coat already on. Mia, you've been underestimated your whole life. Don't let that happen this time. I carried the box out into the night, the cold wind snapping at my coat. Streetlights glowed in the distance, casting a dull amber over the snow. I didn't know who the silent investor was yet, but now I knew one thing for sure. Whoever they were part of a bigger game Mom had been playing all along. And if I wanted the truth, I was going to have to play it better. The box from Jane sat on my kitchen counter like it was radiating heat, even though it was just cardboard and paper. All night I kept glancing at it, telling myself I'd get to it in the morning. But morning came, and the first thing I did was reach for the envelope buried inside. I already knew it was from Mom. I'd seen her handwriting so many times. On grocery lists, on bakery orders, on the Post-it notes she used to leave on the fridge for Lauren, but never for me. Her script had a sharpness to it, like she pressed too hard with the pen, as if she wanted to leave a permanent mark. The letter wasn't long. That almost made it worse. Mia, if you're reading this, you've probably gone looking in places you shouldn't. Your grandmother loved you, but she didn't understand what the bakery needed. I did. That's why I changed things. You were never meant to run it. You're too much like her, too soft. Lauren can handle the pressure. I did what I had to do for this family, even if it meant hurting you. One day, you'll see that I was right. By the time I got to the end, my hands were trembling. My eyes burned, but no tears came. It was like my body refused to give her the satisfaction. The words looped in my head, too much like her. It was supposed to be an insult, but for me, it felt like the only thing worth holding on to. If being like Grandma meant fighting for what mattered, then maybe I'd been right all along. Still, the truth cut deeper than I'd expected. This wasn't just about favoritism. This was about erasing me entirely. She'd forged a version of the will to give Lauren everything and dressed it up as doing what was best. She'd gambled my entire sense of worth on her version of the truth, and then had the nerve to put it in writing. I don't remember standing up, but suddenly I was pacing the kitchen, my bare feet cold against the tile. The clock ticked steadily above the sink, its sound maddeningly calm compared to the storm in my chest. On the counter, one of the old baking trays leaned against the wall, a remnant from when I'd tried to bring more of the bakery into my apartment. I grabbed it without thinking. The first smash against the floor was louder than I expected, a metallic crack that seemed to echo in the small space. I brought it down again, harder, the metal warping under the force. A third time until the handle bent in on itself and the tray clattered useless against the tile. Shards of enamel coating scattered like pieces of something bigger breaking apart. My breath came fast, sharp. The sound of my heartbeat drowned out everything else. I stood there in the wreckage, my chest heaving, the letter still on the counter, like it was watching me. Every word in it was a confirmation of what I'd feared for years, that nothing I did would ever be enough for her, that she would rather burn down whatever I built than admit I was capable. I thought about the investor again, the name on the ownership papers I still hadn't traced. Whoever they were part of this, maybe even a bigger part than I realized. If Mom had been willing to forge a will, she'd be willing to align herself with anyone who could help her keep control. The shards from the tray crunched under my heel as I stepped back. The sound made me think of snow compacting underfoot, brittle, final. The apartment felt too small suddenly, like the walls were leaning in. I needed air. I needed space to think without the letter staring at me from the counter. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. The air was sharp, the kind that catches in your throat. Streetlights glowed against the early darkness, their halos blurred by the faint snow still drifting down. I didn't know exactly what my next move would be, but I knew it wouldn't be passive. If she wanted to erase me, I'd make myself impossible to ignore. The letter's words still pressed against me, heavier than the cold. I did what I had to do for this family. The question was, what would I have to do to take it all back? The snow outside had melted into thin gray slush by the time I got back to my apartment. The city noises were muffled, like the world was holding its breath. Inside, the air was still, the shards of the broken baking tray still scattered on the kitchen floor, like a crime scene I hadn't cleaned up. The wooden box sat where I'd left it, on the corner of the table. For days I'd kept it closed, like opening it would change something I couldn't undo. But after reading Mom's letter, I knew there was no point in waiting anymore. I pulled the box toward me, the engraved words for Mia, when the time comes, catching in the light. My fingers lingered on them for a moment before I slid the latch. The lid creaked open, the sound strangely like a sigh. Under the old photograph of me and Grandma was another folded sheet of paper, thicker than the note I'd found before. The edges were worn, but the seal was still intact. I broke it carefully, almost reverently, and unfolded the document. It was a will. The true will. Grandma's handwriting filled the first few lines, but the rest had been typed, official, notarized. My eyes moved over the words, each one sharper than the last. The bakery was to be left entirely to me. No mention of Lauren, no mention of Mom, just my name, clear as day. And there, near the bottom, was another name, Henry Walker, the silent investor. Grandma had written that Henry was an old friend, someone she trusted to help me if the bakery ever became too much to handle. He wasn't just a name on my ownership papers. He'd been part of her plan all along. I sat back, my pulse quickening. This wasn't just proof that the bakery was mine. It was proof that Mom had known this and fought to bury it. The radiator hissed in the corner, and I realized I was gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles had gone white. My mind kept circling the same image, Mom reading this will and deciding it couldn't exist. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, throwing soft amber light through the blinds. I imagined Henry somewhere out there waiting, maybe wondering if I'd ever figure it out. But the will didn't stop at naming me as the sole owner. There was a paragraph, one Grandma had clearly insisted on, about preserving the bakery's integrity, keeping it in the family in spirit, if not in blood. Those words dug deep, because for the first time in months, I felt the truth settle in my chest. I was exactly who Grandma had wanted here. The rest of the night moved like a blur. Word of what I'd found traveled fast. By the next morning, people in town were already whispering. Some stopped me in the street to congratulate me. Others just stared, curiosity written all over their faces. And the bakery. The bakery glowed in the early evening light, warm and golden against the cold. Inside, I could feel the shift. Customers greeted me first now. Jane was behind the counter instead of Mom, and the air felt lighter without the constant weight of her presence. But the victory was tinged with something else. The image of Lauren leaving town that morning, suitcase in hand, unable to meet my eyes. And Mom. I hadn't seen her since the will surfaced, but I could imagine her retreating into that deep, calculated silence she always used when she was planning her next move. I should have felt triumphant. In a way, I did. The bakery was mine in name, in law, and in spirit. But as I locked the front door that night and turned to look at its glowing windows, a strange distance settled over me. It felt a little like winning a crown that had grown heavier with every step toward it. I slid the will back into the wooden box when I got home, my hands careful, almost protective. The smell of cinnamon rolls from the day still clung to my coat, but instead of warmth, it felt like a reminder. I'd won. But the fight wasn't over, because if Grandma had trusted Henry to help me, I needed to find him and find out what he knew. And deep down, I already knew Mom wouldn't stay quiet for long. It had been a year since the will surfaced, but the weight of it still sat in my chest. The bakery had changed. Fresh paint on the walls, new wooden counters, the scent of warm bread drifting into the street each morning. Customers greeted me by name now. The bell above the door rang with a steady rhythm I had grown to love, but I hadn't expected the letter. It was waiting for me on the counter when I came in early that morning, the sunlight barely spilling over the rooftops outside. A plain envelope, no return address. My name written in a handwriting I knew better than my own. I stood there, my coat still on, the smell of yeast and sugar wrapping around me like a reminder of everything that had happened to get me here. My fingers hesitated before tearing the flap. Mia, I was wrong. Can you forgive me? That was it. No explanation, no list of excuses, just those 7 words in my mother's sharp, unshakable script. I set the letter down beside the jar of brown sugar, my hand lingering on it as if holding it there might keep the moment from shifting into something else. But my mind was already racing. For months after the town hall, after Lauren left and Mom all but disappeared, I told myself I didn't care if she ever spoke to me again, that my victory, legal, undeniable, was enough. But standing there, I realized I'd been bracing for this. Because now I had a choice. In the back office, the unsigned sale contract sat exactly where I'd left it weeks ago. I'd been approached by a developer from the city who wanted to buy the bakery outright, turn it into a high-end cafe with polished marble tables and prices that would make the locals wince. The offer was generous, more than generous, enough to walk away from all of this and never look back. I'd told him I needed time. Now, with Mom's letter in front of me, that choice felt sharper. Selling would cut every remaining tie to her, to Lauren, to the years of being invisible. But it would also mean erasing the last piece of Grandma's dream. The bakery was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator case. My eyes drifted to the loaves cooling on the rack, their crusts still glistening. I'd baked them before dawn, my hands moving in the motions Grandma had taught me: knead, fold, rest. There was comfort in that rhythm, a kind of truth that didn't shift depending on who was looking. But the truth was, keeping the bakery meant keeping the history that came with it. The will might have given me ownership, but it hadn't scrubbed away the betrayal carved into every corner. I picked up Mom's letter again, tracing the edge of the paper. I could almost hear her voice. Not the syrupy tone she used for customers, but the quiet, steady one she reserved for moments she wanted to land. Can you forgive me? It wasn't a question I could answer without losing something. A shadow crossed the window as someone walked by outside. The morning light shifted, catching on the flour dusted across the counter. I remembered standing here as a kid, my hands barely reaching over the edge, watching Grandma shape dough with a focus that made the rest of the world fall away. Back then, I thought love looked like effort. The hours I put in, the bills I paid, the way I stayed even when it would have been easier to walk away. Mom had taught me otherwise. I set the letter back down and pulled the contract toward me. The pen was already there, its cap off, the ink ready. I stared at the blank line where my name would go, my fingers tightening around the barrel. Signing would mean freedom. Staying would mean legacy. Both came with a cost. The front door's lock clicked as the first employee of the day arrived. The sound pulled me back, but my hand didn't move. I folded the contract in half and slid it under the letter, the paper edges catching against each other. I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew one thing. The decision I made next would define more than just the bakery. It would define me. The bakery hums now in a way it never did before, not the hollow buzz of ovens working under someone else's orders, but the full-bodied rhythm of people moving in sync, laughter slipping between the scent of fresh bread and the low hiss of steam. Jane is by the counter, rearranging the day's display, her hands quick but deliberate. On the far table, a couple of kids I've started teaching how to bake are pressing cookie cutters into rolled dough, their giggles floating above the clatter of trays. The afternoon sun pours through the front windows, warming the wooden floorboards and catching flecks of flour in the air like gold dust. I'm hanging the final frame on the wall, a photo of me and Grandma, taken long before the fights, before the lies. She's got her arm around me, our aprons dusted white, the bakery sign clear behind us. It's the first time that space on the wall has felt right. This place is mine now, not just in the legal sense, but in a way I can feel in my chest. The will, the forged lies, the courtroom of small-town gossip, they're all behind me. The investor, Henry, turned out to be exactly what Grandma said. A quiet safety net, not a shadow to fear. He came by last week, shook my hand, and said, "She'd be proud, you know." I believed him. Mom hasn't stepped through the door since the day her letter arrived. I didn't respond. Maybe that was my answer. Lauren's been gone for months, her absence no longer a wound, but a healed-over scar I barely notice. Some people ask about them, most don't. Life fills the empty space quickly when you let it. I run my hand over the smooth counter, feeling the faint vibrations from the mixer in the back. There's no trace of the cold stares or clipped voices that used to rule this place. Instead, there's the shuffle of chairs, the tap of mugs being set down, the murmur of people who feel welcome here. Every morning, I unlock the front door and breathe in the first wave of warm yeast and sugar, and it's like pressing reset on my whole life. I'm not baking for her approval anymore. I'm not kneading my worth into every loaf, hoping someone will notice. I'm doing it because I love it. And because every bite someone takes here is a reminder that I survived being erased. The kids bring over their tray of misshapen cookies, proud of the uneven edges and lopsided stars. I smile and slide them into the oven, telling them the first batch is always the best because it's made without overthinking. They nod like I've just given them the world. In a way, I have. The truth is, family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up early to help with the morning prep, who learn the quirks of the old oven because they want to, who save you the last slice of the good bread without saying a word. I glance back at the photo on the wall. The flour in the picture has faded, but the warmth hasn't. Grandma's bakery is still here, but so is mine. They're the same place now, stitched together by everything I fought through to keep it. It's quiet for a moment, the kind of pause where you can hear the tick of the cooling racks. I close my eyes, just breathing it in. No tension, no waiting for the next blow. Just the soft certainty of having built something that will last. The first batch of cookies is ready. The kids crowd around, eager, faces lit by the glow from the oven. I hand each of them one, still warm, the chocolate soft and melting. They take a bite, and I can't help but laugh when they close their eyes like it's the best thing they've ever tasted. Maybe it is. The bakery's mine now, but its heart still asks me who I'm baking for. And I think I finally know the answer. Have you ever had to redefine family? Share your story in the comments, like this video, and subscribe for more tales of breaking free. If you enjoyed this one, share it with someone who needs it, and stick around for the next story. You won't want to miss it.